She saved his life with a single phone call, but when the millionaire CEO asked who she was, her answer shattered everything he thought he knew: "I'm your daughter." It was just another ordinary morning in the polished, structured world of Eric Hunter. The streets were buzzing with early commuters, the air was filled with the usual sharp energy of Manhattan, and the sun had just begun its climb between skyscrapers. Eric, tall and composed in his signature light suit, adjusted the cuff of his jacket as he stepped out of his sleek black town car in front of the Hunter and Fields building, a modern glass structure he had spent a decade building from the ground up. He didn't pause to admire it today. His mind was already 10 meetings ahead, focused on quarterly reports and an upcoming investor call. In one hand, he carried a leather folder packed with sensitive documents. In the other, his phone buzzed with back-to-back notifications. He took a step toward the lobby when it happened. Two men approached from opposite sides, fast and purposeful, as if they belonged there. At first glance, Eric assumed they were rushing office workers. But when one of them suddenly shoved him against the side of the building, the illusion shattered. The second man yanked the phone out of Eric's hand while the first one tore the folder from his grip. The assault was fast, brutal, and perfectly timed. Eric tried to fight back, but one hard blow to the ribs dropped him to his knees. The men vanished down the street before anyone nearby even realized what had happened. Eric collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping, disoriented. The pain in his chest spread rapidly, sharp and suffocating. He reached weakly toward his inner jacket pocket for a backup phone, gone. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a rasp. He could see people walking past in the distance, unaware or unwilling to stop. Everything started to blur, the glass building towering above him, the morning light, the buzzing city he once ruled. Now it all felt far away, cold, and indifferent. Then, out of nowhere, small footsteps approached. A soft voice broke through the chaos. "Sir? Are you okay?" He turned his head slightly, straining to see who it was. Standing there, barely taller than his outstretched arm, was a little girl in a pink dress. She had long brown hair tied back in a loose braid and striking blue eyes filled with alarm but also strange focus. She didn't hesitate. Without asking another question, she pulled a smartphone out of her small backpack and quickly dialed 911. "This man's hurt," she told the dispatcher calmly. "He needs an ambulance. Right outside Hunter and Fields, on 48th. Eric blinked, trying to hold on to consciousness. The girl knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. "It's going to be okay. They're coming." He looked at her face, something eerily familiar about it, like a reflection from a life he no longer remembered. With a great effort, he forced out a whisper. "Who are you? Why, help me?" She didn't hesitate. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I'm your daughter, Dad." For a moment, the world stood still. Eric's thoughts collided, unable to process what he'd just heard. He wanted to ask more, to see her more clearly, to remember, but the darkness pressing in on his vision became too much. His body gave out, and everything faded to black. As the sirens began to echo in the distance, the little girl stayed at his side, holding his hand tightly like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, because, in a way, she had. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping of machines greeted Eric as he slowly drifted back into consciousness. The soft murmur of nurses moving outside his hospital room filtered through the door. The ache in his chest pulsed steadily with every breath, but it was no longer sharp. He opened his eyes slowly, the ceiling above him blurred and white, unfamiliar. It took a few moments before he remembered the attack. The flash of fists, the ripping of his folder, the thud as he hit the pavement, then the voice. That small, impossibly steady voice. "I'm your daughter, Dad." The words came crashing back to him, overwhelming the pain, more disorienting than the actual assault. He shifted slightly and turned his head toward the window. The sun was lower in the sky now. He had clearly been unconscious for hours. On the chair beside the bed, curled up with her knees to her chest and clutching a stuffed rabbit, was the same little girl. She was asleep now, her chest rising and falling evenly, but the sight of her hit him harder than the attack. She was real. Not a dream or a hallucination. She was right there, alive, breathing, a child who had claimed to be his. Before he could call out to her, the door opened and a woman burst in. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her expression frantic and worn from what looked like a long day of worry. When she saw him awake, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't rush to him. She stood frozen at the foot of the bed. "Eric," she whispered. It took him a few seconds to place her face, but when he did, a storm of memories rose inside him. Laura. The woman he had loved years ago. The woman who had vanished from his life without explanation. He had buried that part of his life under layers of ambition and time, convincing himself that some things simply weren't meant to last. But now she was standing there, older but still unmistakably her, and the child sleeping beside him made sudden, impossible sense. "She's yours," Laura said quietly, answering the question he hadn't yet formed aloud. "Her name is Emma." Eric stared at her, words caught in his throat. "You never told me," he finally managed. "I was going to. I almost did, so many times. But I was scared. You were building your company. You were already barely sleeping, traveling non-stop. I thought, if I told you, it would crush you. Or worse, you'd feel forced into something you didn't want." Her voice trembled. "And then I waited too long. And it became harder to explain. I thought I could just give her the best life I could on my own." Eric turned toward the child again. Emma hadn't moved, still asleep, still clutching that rabbit. He couldn't wrap his mind around it yet. A daughter. 7 years old. A whole life lived without him. It made his chest ache in a completely different way. "She told me," he said slowly. "When I was on the ground. She said she was my daughter." Laura nodded. "She found out recently. I finally told her the truth a few weeks ago. She didn't take it well. She was angry at me, hurt. I think she's been watching you. She knew where your office was. I didn't even realize she'd left the house today. I was at work. I came home and she was gone." Eric sat up a little straighter, wincing from the movement. "She saw me being attacked?" "She did. She called 911. She rode in the ambulance. She refused to leave your side." Laura's voice cracked again. "She's never even met you, and she was still willing to risk everything for you." The reality of it all hit Eric like a tidal wave. He had missed her first steps, her first words, her birthdays, every scraped knee and silly song. He had missed an entire chapter of life that was written without him. But she was here now. She had come to him, chosen him in her own way. And now it was his turn to show her he wouldn't disappear again. Emma stirred in the chair, rubbing her eyes before sitting up. When she saw Eric watching her, she blinked, unsure for a moment if he was really awake. Then, without a word, she slid off the chair and approached his bedside. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," he replied, his voice rough. There was a pause. Then she asked, "Do you feel better?" "A little," he nodded. "Thanks to you." She looked down at her rabbit. "Mom said I shouldn't come. But I wanted to. I had to." Eric swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm glad you did." They looked at each other, both unsure of what should come next. But when Emma quietly reached out and placed her small hand on top of his, something shifted. A bridge had been built, shaky but real, between two people who had never expected to find each other that day. Laura stood by, silent, watching as her past and her daughter's future finally began to intertwine. No one in the room knew what came next, but they all felt it. Something had changed forever. And it had started with a little girl, a phone call, and 7 quiet words that had shattered a lifetime of silence. The next morning came slowly, with soft golden light filtering through the hospital window. Eric was already awake, lying still in his bed, his mind turning restlessly. His body was sore, but it wasn't the bruises or the cracked rib that kept him from resting, it was the little girl who had curled up in the chair across the room, still fast asleep. Emma. His daughter. He had whispered that word to himself all night like a prayer and a question at the same time. How could she be real? How could he have missed 7 years of her life without even knowing she existed? As the machines near his bed continued their gentle beeping, he watched her. She had shifted slightly in her sleep, the stuffed rabbit now half hanging off the chair's arm. Her small hand still clutched the ear tightly. He noticed the faint freckles on her nose, the way her eyebrows furrowed even in sleep, just like his used to when he was a child. There was something incredibly humbling about seeing your own reflection in a face you had never known. For all his success, all the boardrooms and international deals, he had never felt as small, or as terrified, as he did in that quiet moment. The door creaked open and Laura stepped in with 2 cups of coffee. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her face looked drawn, tired in a way that spoke of more than just lack of sleep. She gave him a cautious look, then followed his gaze to Emma. She stayed there all night, Laura said quietly. I offered to take her home with me. She refused. Said she was scared you'd wake up and think it was a dream. Eric let out a slow breath. Feels like one. I know. He took the coffee from her outstretched hand, and for a moment they both just stood, or in his case, sat, in silence. There were no accusations between them now, no raised voices or dramatic questions. Just the shared weight of time lost and damage done. Why now? He asked finally, not bitterly, but genuinely needing to understand. Why did you tell her after all this time? Laura lowered herself into the chair beside his bed. Because I couldn't lie to her anymore. She started asking more questions, about her last name, about her eyes, about why no one in my family looked like her. I kept dodging it, thinking I was protecting her. But I wasn't. I was protecting myself. I was scared that if she knew the truth, she'd hate me for keeping you away. And she did, for a little while. But then she said something that made me realize I had no more right to control the story. She said, maybe he's not perfect, but I still deserve to know him. Laura paused. And she was right. Eric looked down at his hands. I would have wanted to know. I would have figured something out. I believe you, she said. But I didn't believe in myself back then. He didn't respond, not because he was angry, but because the truth of it hurt more than blame ever could. She had made a choice out of fear and broken trust, and it had cost all of them years they could never get back. But now, she was here. Emma was here. And maybe that had to be enough. As the hours passed, a nurse came in to check Eric's vitals and informed him he would be discharged the next day. Laura helped Emma brush her hair in the small guest bathroom, and when they returned, Emma sat at the foot of the bed, swinging her legs nervously. Are you mad at Mommy? She asked suddenly, looking up at Eric. He blinked, startled by the directness of her question. No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. I'm sad. I'm sad I didn't get to know you sooner. But I'm really happy I know you now. Emma nodded solemnly, as if she was still trying to believe it herself. Can I come visit you after you leave here? She asked. I'd like that very much. And maybe, we can go for ice cream sometime? Just us? Eric smiled. It's a date. Laura watched from the corner, her arms folded, her emotions barely contained. She was watching a version of her daughter she had never seen before, hopeful, vulnerable, and open in a way that only a child looking for her father could be. Later that day, Eric received a visit from Detective Ryan, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He offered updates on the investigation. The two attackers had been caught using surveillance footage and facial recognition, and the documents had been found in a nearby alley. The motive was still unclear, whether it had been a random mugging or something targeted, but they were digging deeper. "Could be someone trying to shake you down through intimidation," Ryan said. "You've got enemies in business?" Eric gave a dry chuckle. "I've got competition, not enemies." "Or so I thought." The detective nodded. "We'll get to the bottom of it. But off the record, you're lucky that little girl was there. Most kids her age would have frozen." She was calm. "Fast. She's amazing," Eric said, his voice quieter now. "Yeah," the detective added with a grin. "She saved your life." When Ryan left, Eric leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. The events of the last 24 hours felt surreal: being attacked, discovering he had a daughter, realizing that the world he had built around himself wasn't nearly as full as he thought it was. There had always been something missing. And now, suddenly, that missing piece had a name, a face, and was sitting in a hospital chair drawing stars and hearts in the margins of a visitor brochure. Emma looked up and caught him watching her. She smiled. Eric smiled back. And in that simple exchange, something quiet but powerful took root. A second chance. Fragile, unexpected, but very, very real. The day Eric was discharged from the hospital, the air outside felt different. It was cooler than usual for that time of year, with a soft breeze that cut through the noise of the city. He walked a bit slower than he used to, his ribs still aching with every step, but there was a new weight in his chest that had nothing to do with the injury. Laura had offered to call a car, but he had declined. He wanted to feel the ground beneath his feet, to process the reality that nothing about his life was the same as it had been only days earlier. Emma held his hand as they exited the hospital. Her small fingers wrapped tightly around his, as though afraid that if she let go, he might disappear again. She didn't speak much, just looked up at him every few minutes with an expression of quiet wonder, as if she still couldn't believe this was real. And honestly, neither could he. They arrived at his apartment, an immaculate penthouse in a luxury building that had always felt more like a hotel suite than a home. The doorman gave Eric a surprised look but quickly opened the door, casting a curious glance at the little girl at his side. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it, spotless, perfectly arranged, sterile. Emma stepped inside and immediately slowed, her hand still in his, her eyes scanning the wide space with uncertainty. "It's really big," she said quietly. Eric nodded. "Yeah. But it's kind of empty, too." Emma gave a small, thoughtful look and then slowly let go of his hand to walk toward the large windows. She pressed her palms against the glass and stared out at the endless skyline. He watched her carefully, trying to imagine what this must look like through her eyes. She had grown up in a modest home, maybe a small bedroom filled with toys and color. Here, the walls were bare. Everything was gray and chrome and lifeless. He broke the silence. "Do you want to stay for a while?" Emma turned around. "Just me?" "No," he said, a bit too quickly. "You and your mom. I mean, if she wants to. I think we need some time, not just to talk, but to get to know each other. If that's okay with you." Emma didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked toward the kitchen and peeked into the spotless refrigerator. It was nearly empty, save for a few bottles of water and a takeout box. "You don't have any food," she said, wrinkling her nose. Eric laughed softly. "That's true. I usually order everything. I'm not much of a cook." Emma turned to him, tilting her head. "Can we go shopping? I like helping with groceries." That simple request hit him harder than he expected. She wanted to do something ordinary, something small but meaningful. It wasn't about food. It was about being included. About belonging. "Yeah," he said, his voice catching. "Let's do that." Later that day, they stood together in a nearby grocery store. Emma held a little basket and filled it slowly, cereal she liked, her favorite fruit, a box of animal crackers she insisted he had to try. People around them probably thought they were just a father and daughter out on an afternoon errand, not two strangers trying to glue their lives together one item at a time. Laura met them at the apartment later that evening. She looked hesitant, carrying an overnight bag and a guarded expression. Eric let her in without a word, and she immediately noticed the changes: a blanket on the couch, Emma's shoes by the door, a small drawing taped to the fridge. It was subtle, but real. Life had entered this space. They had dinner together, awkward at first. Eric had tried to make pasta but overcooked it, and Emma giggled as she politely pushed it around her plate. Laura smiled for the first time in days. After the meal, Emma insisted on watching a movie. She chose one she had already seen a dozen times. They sat on the couch, Eric on one side, Laura on the other, and Emma curled up between them like it had always been this way. The movie played, but no one really watched it. Eric kept stealing glances at Laura. He wanted to say something, but the words felt heavy and tangled. Eventually, after Emma had fallen asleep with her head on his arm, he whispered, "I don't know how to do this." Laura looked at him. "Neither do I." "But I want to," he said, more to himself than to her. She nodded. "Then we'll figure it out." That night, Laura took the guest room, and Eric tucked Emma into his bed, placing her stuffed rabbit beside her. She looked up at him, half asleep, and mumbled, "Will you still be here in the morning?" He brushed her hair back gently and answered, "I will." And when she drifted off, he sat quietly by her side, feeling more like a father than he ever had in his life. The apartment was no longer silent. It breathed now, with laughter, with warmth, with possibility. Something new was beginning. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The following days unfolded in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Eric, once consumed entirely by board meetings, investor calls, and global strategy sessions, now found himself waking up to the sound of tiny footsteps, cereal bowls clinking, and the occasional cartoon theme song humming from the living room. It wasn't that he had abandoned his work, he still checked emails and joined the occasional video call. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time in his life, business didn't feel like the most important thing in the room. That honor now belonged to a little girl with blue eyes, who asked questions about everything and left crayon drawings on his dining table like they were sticky notes. On Tuesday morning, Emma sat cross-legged on the kitchen counter, munching on an apple while watching Eric try, for the third time, to make a decent pancake. Flour dusted his shirt, and his forehead was creased in concentration. She giggled each time he flipped one and it landed wrong. Laura stood nearby, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching the scene with amusement she didn't try to hide. "You know, you could have just ordered breakfast," she said. Eric didn't look up. "That's the old me. The new me apparently burns pancakes while being laughed at by a child." Emma gave him a thumbs up. "You're getting better. This one almost looks like a circle." Despite the lightness of the moment, there was something deeper flowing beneath the surface. Laura noticed it more than anyone, Eric's effort. Not just to win Emma's affection, but to show up in every small way possible. He listened when Emma spoke, he adjusted his schedule around her, and he had even downloaded a parenting podcast, which he played at night when he thought no one was listening. He was trying, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of genuine desire. But it wasn't always easy. That afternoon, while Emma was coloring in the living room, Laura pulled Eric aside into the hallway. She looked hesitant, which made him instantly nervous. "She had a nightmare last night," she said softly. "Did she tell you?" Eric shook his head. "No. She said she dreamed you disappeared. That she came out of her room and the apartment was empty. Just cold and empty. Eric looked away, jaw tightening. That's probably my fault. It's not about blame, Laura said gently. It's about understanding what she's still carrying. She wants to trust this. She wants to believe you're here to stay. But she's afraid. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. I know that. But she doesn't. Not yet. That night, Eric knocked on Emma's door after she had gone to bed. She was still awake, hugging her rabbit, eyes wide in the dim glow of the nightlight. Can I come in? He asked. She nodded silently. He sat at the edge of her bed and took a deep breath. Your mom told me about your dream. Emma turned her face toward the wall. It was dumb. No, it wasn't, he said. It was honest. And you can always be honest with me. Even when it's scary. She looked back at him slowly. Are you really going to stay? I am, he said. I didn't know about you before, and that's something I'll regret forever. But now that I do, nothing's going to take me away. Not work. Not anything. Emma stared at him, silent for a moment. Then she whispered, Promise? Eric reached out and pinky-linked her small hand. Promise. From that night on, Emma began to relax. She started leaving her bedroom door open a crack when she slept. She asked Eric to walk her to the park. She even corrected him when he said something wrong about her favorite book, which he took as a sign that she now felt comfortable disagreeing with him. Laura, meanwhile, found herself navigating a storm of her own emotions. Seeing Eric with Emma, watching him evolve into a father overnight, stirred up a quiet ache in her. It reminded her of what they once had, before fear and ambition pulled them apart. They hadn't spoken much about the past yet, hadn't dared to unbox all the what-ifs and might-have-beens. But there were moments, fleeting and unspoken, when their eyes met and held for just a second too long. One evening, after Emma had gone to sleep and the apartment had fallen into a calm hush, Laura joined Eric on the balcony. The city buzzed below, and the warm breeze carried with it a sense of openness neither of them had felt in years. I don't know how to do this either, Laura said quietly, not looking at him. Parenting? He asked. Everything. He nodded. Same. They stood in silence for a while, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. Then Laura added, but I'm glad we're not doing it alone anymore. Eric glanced at her, his voice soft. Me too. It wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a beginning. A fragile trust, being rebuilt from the wreckage of secrets and years apart. Inside, in her bed filled with books and stuffed animals and drawings of stars, Emma slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. And outside, her parents stood quietly side by side, no longer strangers, not yet a family, but something real in the making. The following week brought a new sense of routine, though no one dared call it normal yet. Mornings began with cereal and uneven ponytails, and nights ended with bedtime stories that Eric often stumbled through but Emma listened to with rapt attention anyway. Each day seemed to teach all of them something new, about patience, about forgiveness, about how to be a family without a roadmap. But as life settled, reality crept back in, and with it came questions that no one had yet dared to fully ask. Eric had scheduled a quiet lunch with his attorney to discuss updates on the investigation and to start the legal process of establishing paternity. Not because he doubted Emma was his, he didn't. The truth had settled in his heart from the moment he saw her eyes. But the law needed more than belief, and Eric wanted to make sure that if something ever happened, there would be no question of his right to protect her. The memory of lying helpless on that sidewalk, unable to call for help, haunted him more now, not for his own sake, but for Emma's. The attorney, a woman named Rachel Shaw, had handled high-profile clients before, but even she seemed moved by the story. She looked over the documents Eric handed her and nodded. We can expedite the process, she said. The DNA test is just a formality, but it's required. Once it's processed, we can file for parental rights recognition, joint custody, or whatever arrangement you and her mother agree to. Eric exhaled. She lives with me now, at least part-time. I want that to be protected. I'm not trying to take her from Laura, God, no, but I need to know I won't lose this again. Rachel gave a sympathetic smile. You're doing the right thing. It's not just about the law. It's about telling Emma she's safe, and that you'll be there, legally and emotionally. That night, Eric brought it up gently to Laura while Emma played on the rug nearby. They sat on the couch, Emma humming to herself as she stacked plastic animals in neat rows. I want to file for legal recognition, Eric said quietly. Not because I don't trust you, but because I've learned what it's like to lose time I can't get back. I need to know it's official. That no matter what happens, between us, with work, with anything, I have the right to be in her life. Laura didn't answer immediately. Her fingers tugged lightly at the sleeve of her sweater, her eyes focused on the floor. I was afraid you'd ask that, she said softly. Not because it's wrong. But because part of me still feels like I don't deserve your help. That I made too many decisions alone. Eric turned to her, his voice steady. You made the choices you felt were right. I won't pretend I'm not angry about how much time I missed, but I'm here now. I'm not asking for control, Laura. I'm asking for security, for Emma. She looked up at him, and for the first time in a while, her eyes didn't carry their usual guarded tension. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it together. The next morning, they brought Emma to the clinic for the test. It was quick and simple, a cheek swab, a few signatures, but Emma was unusually quiet the whole time. On the way home, she finally asked the question that had clearly been building inside her. Does this mean you'll stop being my dad if it doesn't work? Eric turned around in his seat so he could look her in the eyes. No. Never. The test doesn't decide how much I love you. It's just something grown-ups need to do for paperwork. I'm your dad because I'm here, because I love you, and because I'm not going anywhere. Emma seemed to take that in for a moment. Then she said, okay, and leaned her head against the car window, holding her stuffed rabbit in her lap like it was an anchor. The results came back 3 days later. No surprises. A 99.9% match. Eric stared at the paper for a long time, not because he doubted it, but because it felt like validation of everything he already knew deep in his soul. He framed a copy and hung it in his office, not for show, but as a reminder of the most important connection he'd ever discovered. At the same time, Detective Ryan reached out with an update. One of the men who attacked Eric had confessed to being paid, not to rob him, but to scare him. The confession was vague, but it suggested someone had a personal interest in destabilizing Eric's life. Laura looked panicked when she heard this. Eric noticed immediately and pulled her aside. What aren't you telling me? Laura hesitated, then lowered her voice. Greg. My ex. He's been controlling, even after we broke up. He used to get angry if Emma even mentioned your name. I didn't think he knew where you worked, but now /. Eric felt something cold settle in his chest. Do you think he could have done this? I don't know, she said. But I wouldn't put it past him. For the first time since the hospital, fear began to creep back into their newly built world. But this time, Eric wasn't helpless on the sidewalk. This time, he was awake, aware, and ready. He called Rachel Shaw and asked her to begin filing for full joint custody with protective clauses. He scheduled a meeting with Detective Ryan. And he looked at Laura with a quiet fire in his eyes. We're not going backward, he said. No one is taking her away again. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the battle quietly unfolding in one high-rise apartment. But inside, a father and mother sat side by side, no longer divided by the past, but joined in the present for the sake of a little girl who had unknowingly built a bridge between two broken adults. And in the corner of the living room, Emma continued to draw, two tall stick figures, one small one between them, all holding hands. The sun shone above them, and she wrote one word in block letters underneath. Family. The next few weeks moved in waves, some calm, some tense, and others full of quiet healing. There was no single turning point, no cinematic moment where everything fell into place. Instead, change came in fragments. It came when Eric picked Emma up from school for the first time and she ran to him across the parking lot without hesitation. It came when Laura laughed, really laughed, during dinner as Emma told a story about a bird that stole her sandwich. It came when Emma started calling him Dad without testing the word on her tongue first. These moments were small, easily missed to the outside world, but for them, each one was a tiny rebellion against the pain that had once defined their story. But while the family was rebuilding its foundation, the outside threat that loomed over them had not entirely disappeared. Detective Ryan had continued his investigation, slowly gathering more information about Greg, Laura's ex-boyfriend. Though Greg hadn't been formally charged yet, his presence was becoming a quiet pressure in the background, especially when Eric discovered that someone had tried to access building security footage from his apartment complex. The request was denied, flagged, and passed along to him through the concierge. The name on the access request form? Gregory Adams. Eric showed Laura the document that evening. She went pale, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then she slowly sat down at the kitchen table and ran both hands through her hair. "I was afraid of this," she whispered. "He's not going to let it go. He never does." Eric pulled up a chair across from her. "We've taken legal steps. The custody paperwork is filed. The protective order is in progress. You're not alone anymore, Laura." "I know," she said. "But he doesn't play by rules." Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Eric stayed up, sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand. The city was buzzing, alive as always, but for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man shaped by it. He wasn't defined by his company, or the skyline, or the accolades he once chased. Now, he felt defined by the soft breath of a little girl asleep in the next room. By the sound of her laugh when she watched cartoons. By the way her hand fit into his, like it was always meant to be there. The next day brought unexpected warmth. It was Saturday, and the sun had returned after days of heavy clouds. Emma had begged them to go to the park, and neither Eric nor Laura had the heart to say no. They packed sandwiches and juice boxes and spent hours beneath a tree that offered just enough shade. Emma chased butterflies, then collapsed dramatically on the blanket, demanding story time. Eric read to her from a book she brought, his voice steady and soft. Laura watched them, the sound of Eric's voice blending with the rustle of wind through leaves. It was peaceful, fragile, and for a moment, perfect. But peace never lasted long in stories like theirs. On Monday morning, while Laura was on her way back from a quick trip to grab groceries, she noticed a familiar figure leaning against the car parked near the building entrance. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Greg. He hadn't seen her yet, but she could tell from the way he scanned the street that he was waiting. Laura didn't go home. She turned around and called Eric immediately. "She's not coming back to the apartment," Eric said, already grabbing his coat. "Bring her to my office. I'll call security. We're not letting this escalate." Emma, confused but compliant, stayed close to her mother as they entered the lobby of Hunter and Fields. Eric was already downstairs waiting. He scooped Emma up in his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she clung to him tightly, not entirely sure what was wrong, but sensing the tension in every adult face around her. Upstairs, in the safety of his office, Eric met with his legal team and called Detective Ryan. Within an hour, the building had surveillance footage of Greg pacing outside, and a new emergency order was filed with the court. "I'm not letting him anywhere near either of you again," Eric said, standing in front of Laura with the kind of calm intensity that didn't need to be raised to be taken seriously. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded. "I believe you." That evening, back at the apartment, they sat down with Emma to explain what was happening, not all the frightening details, but enough so she would understand that there were people trying to make sure she was safe, and that they were working together to protect her. Emma listened carefully, then asked, "Are you scared?" Eric paused, then said, "Sometimes. But being scared doesn't mean we stop doing what's right. It just means we do it together." Emma thought about that for a moment. "Like a team?" "Exactly," he said. "We're a team." Over the next few days, the sense of danger began to lift. Greg was formally warned by police, and the restraining order was served. With the legal papers finalized and full joint custody granted, the law was now on their side, but more importantly, so was time. Every day that passed without chaos was another thread added to the tapestry they were weaving together. And one night, just before Emma drifted off to sleep, she looked up at Eric and said, "I like being part of something." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You are. You're the heart of it." And with that, she closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as sleep claimed her. In the darkness of the room, lit only by the soft hum of the city outside, Eric sat beside her bed and let himself finally exhale. They weren't finished yet. There were still shadows on the edge of their story. But the center was strong now. The bond between father and daughter, the tentative healing between two former lovers, and the fragile piece of a family learning to exist, all of it was real. And it was enough. Spring quietly folded into early summer, and with it came a gentle transformation none of them had expected, but all of them deeply needed. The apartment that once felt like a hotel now carried the distinct echo of family: scattered shoes by the door, crayon marks on the corners of newspapers, a permanent stack of children's books on the coffee table, and the occasional half-finished drawing taped proudly to the refrigerator. Eric's once silent penthouse had become alive with the constant hum of life: Emma's laughter, Laura's voice reading recipes aloud, the soft shuffle of socks in the hallway as someone padded across it in the early morning. These were not things Eric had ever imagined for himself, not even during the days when he thought he might want them. But now, he could no longer imagine life without them. He had cut his work hours significantly, assigning more responsibilities to his executives, shifting meetings to remote calls, and, in a decision that stunned his board, canceling 2 international trips to remain home through the summer. When a fellow CEO asked him at a conference why he seemed so different lately, Eric had simply answered, "Because I have something better to come home to now." And it was true. No contract, deal, or merger could offer him the feeling of walking through his front door and hearing a little voice call out, "Dad. You're home." Emma, for her part, had bloomed in ways no one could have predicted. She had always been bright, but now there was light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She asked deeper questions. She drew pictures of her and her parents holding hands in fields of sunflowers. She began sleeping with the door to her room fully open. Her nightmares had stopped. And she stopped asking if Eric would be there tomorrow. Because now she knew the answer. One particularly warm afternoon, Laura and Eric took her to the botanical garden. Emma ran ahead of them down the flower-lined paths, chasing butterflies and occasionally spinning in place with her arms outstretched like a tiny whirlwind of joy. Eric watched her with quiet awe, one hand resting lightly against Laura's back. For a long while, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to fix in that moment. Nothing to regret. Just sunlight, movement, and something that felt very close to peace. After they sat on a bench beneath a blooming magnolia tree, Laura turned to him and asked, "Did you ever think you'd have this?" Eric shook his head. "I thought I had everything. I had money, respect, power. But I didn't know how empty it all was until I saw her face for the first time." Laura looked down at the little sketchbook Emma had left beside her on the bench. On the open page was a simple drawing, a stick figure girl between 2 taller figures. Above their heads were hearts. Below them, one word, written in uneven but bold letters, family. Later that evening, back at the apartment, Emma insisted on putting on a family talent show. She lined up 3 chairs to face the living room and made them pretend to be her audience. With a handmade microphone made from a paper towel roll and aluminum foil, she sang a song she had made up on the spot about pancakes, stars, and the best daddy who ever didn't know he had a daughter but now he does and he's awesome. Eric had to turn his face slightly to hide the tears. Laura didn't even bother. That night, after Emma was tucked in, Laura and Eric sat by the window again, as they had so many nights before. The city shimmered below them, but it no longer felt like it was above their heads. They had brought the skyline down to eye level. Made it something they could live with rather than live for. "I've been thinking," Eric said, breaking the silence. "Not just about us. But about you. What do you want now? Not just with Emma. With your life." Laura hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I want to finish my degree. I never got the chance. I've been looking at programs nearby. Part-time. I want to build something for myself again. Not because I have to survive, but because I finally have space to dream." Eric reached for her hand. "Then I'll help. Whatever you need." She looked at him, and there was gratitude there, but also something deeper. Trust. It was a fragile kind of love, not the kind that blazes hot and disappears, but the kind that roots itself quietly, patiently, waiting for the right season to grow. On Emma's 8th birthday a few weeks later, they threw a picnic in the park. Nothing extravagant. Just friends, a few balloons, homemade cupcakes, and a lot of laughter. Eric gave her a small silver bracelet engraved with her initials and the date of the first time she called him Dad. When she opened the box, she didn't say anything. She just hugged him so tightly around the neck he could barely breathe. And then she whispered, "This is the best birthday ever." That night, after everyone had gone home and the apartment had grown quiet again, Eric stepped into Emma's room to say goodnight. She looked up at him from her bed, eyes heavy but shining. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Yes, baby? I'm glad you didn't stay gone." He bent down and kissed her forehead. "Me too." And as she drifted off, rabbit tucked under one arm, bracelet still on her wrist, Eric stood there for a long while, watching her, memorizing every detail of this new life he had almost missed. But he hadn't. He was here. He was all in. And for the first time, he finally understood what it meant to be rich. It wasn't about legacy. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about success. It was about her. About them. About finding family when you thought it was lost forever, and never letting go again. In my view, the ending of this story is not just a resolution, it's a quiet triumph. It doesn't rely on dramatic revelations or grand gestures, but instead finds its emotional power in the healing of everyday moments, shared breakfasts, bedtime routines, trust rebuilt one conversation at a time. What makes this conclusion so powerful is that it honors the weight of what was lost, years, memories, chances, while choosing to focus on what can still be saved and cherished. Eric doesn't become a perfect father overnight. Laura doesn't forget the years of silence. But together, they make the brave decision to step into something fragile and real for the sake of the child who unknowingly stitched their lives back together. Emma is the heart of the story, not just because she's the link between past and present, but because she teaches both adults what unconditional love looks like. The story ends not with everything fixed, but with the promise that it can be better, and that, sometimes, is the most honest and hopeful kind of ending there is.